House of the Dragon just ended, and House of the Dragon season 2 just ended, not the entire series. That would be pretty crazy if it actually was the end of the series here, because all of the season was basically set up for the next season. So if they just pulled the plug on it now and be like, hey, you know what? That's where this rodeo stops. That would be pretty interesting. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I bet season 3 is already confirmed, and I'm just not in the loop on it. Anyway, though, time to power on the fryers to serve up that yappy meal off the menu here to give you my thoughts on season 2 of House of the Dragon. Most of you know I really liked season 1. I was stunned by how much I liked season 1, actually, considering how hard Game of Thrones fumbled with season 8, and also season 7 was lackluster too, but season 8 was... that was an affront to God. That was I go on and on about this all the time. Game of Thrones was the biggest show in the world, and then they turned it to the biggest shit in the world with season 8. I use this reference a lot. Breaking Bad wrapped up years before Game of Thrones did, and yet Breaking Bad is still talked about fondly and referenced to this day. Meanwhile, Game of Thrones is just like this sad thought that people occasionally remember as, oh yeah, what a shame. So, I didn't go into House of the Dragon Season 1 with high expectations, but I was pleasantly surprised with how good it was. And Season 2, I had high hopes for, considering how much I liked Season 1. And now, after finishing the finale, I can comfortably say it's not as good as Season 1, unfortunately. I didn't hate it or anything, I don't think it's bad, but it really does feel like this whole season is just set up for the next season. There are some moments of greatness though, episode 4 I actually thought was a super strong episode. That's the one that you saw a lot of people talking about. I'm not going to get into spoilers for this, so don't worry. But there definitely were some great moments in season 2, but overall it kind of just felt like it was sleepwalking sometimes. For example, Damon basically does fuck all in season 2. This guy has basically just been benched as this sidelined character that you tune in occasionally for him going through this perpetual bath salt trance. So he's in Harrenhal for the vast majority of this season. And it was always this back and forth of, is he going to betray Rhaenyra? What are his actual intentions? Oh, he wants it for himself. He's always coveted the crown, this and that. But it's so boring. So he's in Harrenhal, and he basically hallucinates every single night. So he just walks around in a stupor, seeing things, and he's like, oh, this is fucking fishy, this is odd. So he'll be having these meetings with people, but he's only half there because he's imagining other things, and then there's a woman there who he keeps calling a witch, and basically every time you see Damon, it's him gathering an army, but kind of just floundering his way through it because he's mainly just hallucinating lore, more or less. And see, the final episode of the season, there is a good resolution to all of that, but it doesn't change how boring it was getting to that. Because he really is just, off in, the loony bin of Harrenhal to himself. He's just, fucking institutionalized over there, and people reference him, Rhaenyra's well, I don't know Damon's intentions, so I'm just gonna proceed as if he doesn't exist. And for all intents and purposes, he kind of just doesn't exist in the main story. He's, off on his own thing, his own little... adventure there. So it's stuff like that where it just feels so underwhelming. It's clearly setting up for something big for Damon here, obviously, I get that. But it doesn't make it satisfying because when the finale rolls around, it doesn't really feel satisfying because we haven't really seen him do much of anything. There was one or two cool moments in Harrenhal, but they don't really lead to anything because again, this whole season is just set up for the following seasons. So it's just, I don't know, it's just not very satisfying. And to piggyback off of that, a lot of the other things are just putting pieces in place. So something that's really cool is how they get more dragon riders. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are more dragon riders that come into the fold here in a way that's never been explored before in lore and on screen. And it's really cool. The way that a dragon chooses a rider, where if it doesn't like you, it just incinerates you. It just fucking sends you straight to the Shadow Realm. And it's a really tense scene. It's a great scene. It's fucking hype. But we don't see anything from that past that point in this season. We will in the next season, and it was cool for that episode, but then in the following episode, there's nothing from it. You know what I mean? It's just, I get how important setting things up is, but it still feels lackluster by the time the finale rolls around because it's all about putting the pieces on the board, getting them where they need to be for the next season, which I imagine will be kind of just all-out pandemonium would be my guess. Another thing I really didn't like is this season is starting to suffer from the same thing I said about Game of Thrones Season 7, where all of a sudden everyone has unlocked fast travel on the map. Where in Game of Thrones, in the early seasons, it would be like an entire season of marching before they reached their destination. Like, there was a sense of time which increased the sense of scale in the world. In here, the characters can once again kind of just like fucking Goku instant transmission where they need to be. So Rhaenyra can go talk to Alicent kind of whenever she wants, like no trouble at all. It seemed like a really easy procedure. And keep in mind, she is public enemy number 1. And with a very simple disguise, she just infiltrates the most secure place in the world there and talks to Alicent, no problem whatsoever. And then Alicent does the same to Rhaenyra. No problem whatsoever, and nobody notices, no one's none the wiser. Like, it's so quick, and it seems so easy to travel between places. Another example, there is a knight who is sent from, Team Aegon, and the knight easily infiltrates Rhaenyra's castle. Like, it's just, it happens so quick. There's no sense of, like, danger with going from place to place. It just seems like all of the security's the worst in the world. Like, they all just have their fucking eyes closed or something. So it just takes away from, like, the actual high stakes. Like, in my opinion, if it's that easy to go from point A to point B without any trouble. You know what I mean? Another thing that I also didn't like all that much, left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, is how easy it seems to make alliances. It seems like anybody can make an alliance with the most elusive people ever, willy-nilly. Like, it just seems like no matter how bad the blood, they can easily form an alliance through just meeting, like, the most... I don't want to say, like, easiest mutual agreement, because they're not, like, easy per se, but it seems far simpler than I would have ever expected it to be. And I'm talking massive alliances. Like, there are some big alliances that form, and it really seemed like it was just one conversation and one loaf of bread away from happening. Like, and that's it. Like, there wasn't needing to be, like, some kind of big gesture or anything. They just had to say, like, hey, do you want to, like, team up? And then they fist bump and everything's, like, all good. I do, however, really like Aemond in this season. I think Aemond is probably the strongest character here, and not because he has a whole lot to do. Like, it's not like the writing around Aemond was, like, incredible or anything, but he's just at least interesting. He is just this, like, man-child leader who is just constantly in this fit of rage, in this desire to prove how powerful he is with Vhagar. And at the very least, that drives things. Like, he himself is, like, the driving force behind things happening, whereas every other character feels like they're just stagnant. He is pushing things forward, if that makes sense. I'm trying to avoid spoilers to the best of my ability, so I can't, like, get super specific with what I mean by that. But, for example, something that happens to Aegon that has a huge impact on everything is mainly because of Aemond. So it's just one of those things where I think Aemond was pretty much the only character this season that was actively taking matters into their own hands and doing shit, whereas everyone else was more conniving and setting things up, which I didn't expect from the season, because season 1 ended with Rhaenyra's son being fucking murdered by Aemond on Vhagar, where Vhagar just annihilates her son and the dragon. And then she, like, stares into the camera, and, like, I was like, holy shit, I was shocked by how that season ended, and I thought this season would be everything popping off, but then it actually pumps the brakes hard, and it is slow, which is fine if it's, like, really well written, but it only sometimes is. Like I said, there are moments where it's super solid, but then there's moments where it's just kind of in this, like, dull limbo, where it just feels like nothing is really happening. For example, Rhaenyra this season spends most of it in a state of reacting to information as opposed to doing stuff. Like, she is constantly in this, like, turmoil where she wants to be more active, but everyone tells her not to. So then it leads to her just staying in the castle mostly, and then responding to stuff that's going on occasionally. And sometimes she does go on her own And that's when things get moved forward sometimes, like when she rides on her dragon to meet a mysterious dragon rider. And then that leads to a whole plan that nobody ever thought of before, which was cool. And I would have liked to see more things like that. It's just the season doesn't feel satisfying because now that the finale's come out, we know that all it is build up. Like, if this season wasn't over yet, like if there were more episodes to come, it'd be pretty hype with the position that things are in. But because it's the finale and it's going to be a long time before it's picked up again, it's just left with kind of like this, okay, I guess, kind of sensation. Because you go through these 8 episodes, and fundamentally, we're in a very similar spot as we were to the beginning of the season, where we know war is inevitable. We know war is coming. The only thing that's changed now is some of the pieces on the board and the power behind those pieces. And that just doesn't feel like really great television where you just watched an entire season of build-up without any kind of payoff at the end. But I don't think it's bad. Like, there were things I enjoyed about it. I really would like to talk more about the dragon scenes in particular, but I don't want to ruin it for anyone, so I'll refrain. But I really like that they injected more personality into the dragons. Like, I actually got a good sense of the dragons through the writers and how they responded to some of the writers, which was cool. That was pretty cool. There were things I liked about this season, but overall I think it was a pretty weak season, especially compared to how great season 1 was. If I was to plug it into the moist meter, I'd give it like a 65% maybe, something like that. But yeah, hopefully season 3's a banger. I hope it can be more like season 1 and less like season 2. And yeah, that's really about it. So yeah.